This video is sponsored by you and your incredibly generous support on Patreon. Help me continue to make videos, get early access to completely ad-free uploads, your name in the credits, and more by heading to patreon.com/writingongames. Thank you so much, and now on with the show. I know it might sound weird given that it's 2020 we're talking about here, but I feel like I played and enjoyed more games last year than I have done in a long time. But what stands out to me most upon reflection is the sheer breadth of releases available to players. Indeed, in a year of general instability, we saw many games delayed into 2021 and possibly beyond, with the titles set up to be these huge events expected to top everyone's lists, often being met with as much disdain as respect. Even with the relative sparsity you've come to expect from launch lineups for new hardware, 2020 really didn't feel like much of a next-gen year. And with as much strain as supply chains and hastily put together work-from-home setups were under in 2020, it's unlikely we've seen the worst of the effects of this stuff quite yet. But with all of that in mind, what this odd scenario allowed for was a lot of really great titles being afforded the spotlight that they might not have gotten in a normal year, with no one game that really stands out as that Breath of the Wild, God of War-esque critical darling grabbing every available #1 spot. No one unifying trend you can readily point to and say, this must define the industry for years to come. Instead, it seems as if whatever your needs were this year as a means of distraction from the world around you, you were likely more than catered for. Anywhere from zen life simulators to pure arcade action to ultra-difficult meaty games for you to sink your teeth into. Speaking personally, this variety certainly made my year a whole lot more interesting, where I actually felt newly inspired to write, mainly as a coping mechanism though, and it resulted in the over 5 hours of video I was able to produce in 2020, representing what I believe to be my best work yet. Even if the growing pressures of YouTube resulted in my efforts to gain a more effective work-life balance getting thrown out the window as 70+ hour weeks became pretty consistent across the entire year, feeling like a lot of my energy was going towards just fighting the platform I find myself on as it tried its absolute damnedest to crush my spirit into dust and make me question if I was even good enough or if people gave the remotest shit about what I had to say. And none of this is even to mention the years, the decades of very real and very unprocessed trauma I've simultaneously had to unpack in therapy, the completely exhausting process of confronting the crippling self-doubt that's been instilled in me at every stage of my life, and I feel guilty for even thinking that because there are others that have had it so much worse. At least I'm not in retail anymore, and I feel terrified even typing this out and saying it to an audience of thousands of strangers, and yeah, I tried to go without the seemingly inevitable listing out the obvious abject horrors of 2020 in these kinds of roundups, but I guess it's kind of hard to talk about what these games meant to me this year without talking a little bit about my own year, and well, yeah, it's been rough. What I can say I'm extremely thankful for though is certain people for helping me just get through the year at least, but relevant here is the continued and unbelievably generous support of my patrons for allowing this show, this outlet to continue against all of YouTube's odds. I guarantee you, without it I wouldn't be making this video right now. Contrary to the image most people seem to have of full-time YouTubers, I really don't make a lot of money doing this, but that's never been the point for me. I just want to continue making videos about media I love, as separate from the stresses that surround that endeavour, the process is still hugely rewarding to me, and I hope that the end product was able to give you some small amount of comfort in this terrible year. Which, after all of that, finally brings us onto the list you're actually here for. I've said it before, but as tired as some believe the format to be, I find a great deal of comfort in these kinds of year-end roundups, and given the aforementioned circumstances surrounding releases, I'm more curious than ever to see how everyone's individual lists stack up and what they each found value in. And so, without any further ado, let's dive into the 6th annual, Jesus Christ, Writing on Games Top 5 Games of 2020 list. That I've played, obviously, and also this list is based purely on personal opinion, and if your list is different, that's absolutely fine, with some honourable mentions thrown in for good measure. And at number 5, we have Demon's Souls. One of the videos I enjoyed making most this year was about how, in times of stress, I often find myself drawn, perhaps counterintuitively, towards challenging games in a bid to match that struggle on my own terms. In the same way some have drawn a link between watching horror films during periods of anxiety as a kind of immersion therapy, these games offer a venting of negative emotion in a controlled, fictional environment. with games offering the added benefit of actual achievement against a once insurmountable foe. And when I started playing Bluepoint's remake of Demon's Souls, I expected a similar kind of borderline masochistic catharsis. When you think of Souls, one of the first things that comes to mind is likely difficulty, especially at the starting point of the series, the title that spawned a cavalcade of reviewers spouting the phrase, "You will die a lot." But what I actually found was that after spending years plumbing the depths of the Soulsborne genre and training myself in each game's progressively more demanding combat system, that returning to Boletaria was a comparatively more mellow experience. Tough, sure, but nothing we haven't dealt with before. That's not to say though that the experience was any less enriching, quite the opposite. Not feeling so utterly crushed by enemies at every turn allowed more breathing room to truly luxuriate in the incredible atmosphere, the tragic beauty of this world, brought to the fore in spectacular fashion through Bluepoint's keen attention to detail and the power of the new hardware they're working with, highlighting just how crucial Demon's Souls has always been to the series' identity. To say this game is a treat for the eyes would be an understatement. Its more straight-ahead combat encouraging a slower, more measured approach, reminding me of why I love this series so much. But perhaps most crucially, it felt less like some grueling trek defined by despair, and more akin to a victory lap. 2020's general difficulty was matched by the release of a ton of tough games, but Demon's Souls was, unexpectedly, a means of reflecting on how much we might have already achieved in surviving and adapting up to that point. What can I say, I had a total blast with this game. And at number 4 we have Hades. For all my spiel about how everyone's lists were going to be different this year, I think Supergiant's latest is about as close as you're going to get to a true consensus on just how fantastic a game is. I bought it the day it was placed into early access at the launch of the Epic Store, but didn't end up touching it until its full 1.0 release earlier last year. Truth is, I was fairly wary about Hades generally right up until I played it. Supergiant games, even at their best, have failed to leave much of a mark on me outside of a distant but very real respect for what they were achieving, and that they were creating a roguelike, a genre where concrete progression feels hard to come by thanks to a focus on procedural generation and the hard reset of death, didn't instill much hope that this would be the game of theirs to truly blow me away. Oh, how delightfully wrong I was. Hades is at once one of the most intricately constructed games I've played in God knows how long, and one that still somehow manages to surprise me at pretty much every turn, despite the hours and hours I've put into it. I'd go as far as to say it solves almost every problem I have with the genre, with pitch-perfect balancing of difficulty allowing every new encounter to feel palm-sweatingly tense, the sheer chaos of everything going on screen remaining remarkably readable given the detail and vibrancy of its art style, but mainly the treatment of death as not merely a zero-sum game, where constant upgrades allow you to feel like you're always making some small amount of progress, but as a narrative device, framing this massive, bafflingly responsive story playing out before you. All of which means that no matter how much progress you might have made and lost on your last run, Supergiant manages to turn any potential frustration into excitement, as each failure provides an opportunity to get to know these completely charming denizens of the afterlife. And god, did Supergiant have such a great time with the Pantheon here, as well as give you just the push you need to plough through everything once more and remind yourself that you're stronger for what you have just endured. Hades would absolutely be higher on my list if it weren't for the fact that I wasn't able to put quite enough time in to beat it, but this has been one of those rare titles where playing anything else for the sake of creating the videos has always come with that twinge of, damn, I could be playing more Hades right now. Just a fantastically crafted game from top to bottom, and I can't wait to get back into it. And at number 3 we have Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise. It took me years to beat the original Deadly Premonition, eventually, finally getting it done earlier in 2020. And holy moly, that game is legitimately incredible. It makes you work to really love it, but once it gets its hooks into you, it's hard to think of anything quite like it. After a certain point, all the memes about how it's so bad it's good and hee York's just a big goofball and everything else just fade away, to reveal a title that's just really, really great, as you're transported to one of the most ambitious and atmospheric open worlds I've ever navigated, and a truly gripping narrative that I am so glad I didn't have spoiled for me over the years. It goes some places. And so when I finished Deadly Premonition 1, I didn't have the 10-year wait some endured. nor the heavy expectation that inevitably comes with that between the cult hit original and its much anticipated sequel, surprise announced less than a year before release. And judging from the critical response, at least initially, it seemed as if people that had waited all this time were left fairly underwhelmed. I, on the other hand, was able to jump right in, and honestly, being able to place my trust in its creator that he'd more than earned with the first title, I came away thinking that A Blessing in Disguise ended up being just that. A game whose spiky exterior belies what I believe to be kind of the perfect sequel, whose story feels like it had just been sitting in Swery's head from the moment he finished work on the first game, taking narrative risks that feel just as wild as where the first game ended up going. And it's incredibly hard to really explain why this is the case without spoiling aspects of either game, but now knowing the context of York's character and the fascinatingly dark reasons that he is the way he is, lends a fantastic nuance to the interactions between the more brusque denizens of Lucari and a younger York with decidedly more to prove to the world. Where the residents of Greenvale more or less went along with our protagonist's quirks, deferring to his unorthodox but undoubtedly effective methods, the citizens here are far more likely to call York out on who he's talking to, or why he's referencing films, or riding a skateboard. Swery loves this character so much that there's always an answer, but importantly one that goes far beyond simply weird for weird's sake. Each interaction instead focuses on further expanding the wonderfully rich tapestry of York's life in a way that's both admiring and a little confrontational, in both the game's past and present day narratives, with the latter taking the MGS4 approach of showing such a beloved protagonist as a shambling, suspicious wreck, using this ambitious structure to explore the notion that for all the series' funny little eccentricities, we're dealing with particularly grisly murder cases here, and the trauma that almost necessarily comes with that. And to my mind, the payoff here is kind of mind-blowing. I was full on gasping towards the end without ever feeling like this was the result of trite fan service. Trust me, if you stick with this game, it will reward you. It's worth highlighting though that A Blessing in Disguise has real problems. People have expressed concern, for example, with the game's undeniably clumsy handling of race and trans issues, but the one complaint I just can't share in any degree of fervour around is the game's technical shortcomings. Sure, it runs like hammered shit, but honestly, does it matter? Even as someone who adores high frame rates in games, I just can't get mad at it here. Again, maybe it's just freedom from the weight of so many years of expectation, but where a lot of players saw a game that hadn't progressed technically from the already rough state of its predecessor, I saw a title that solved a bunch of more fundamental design issues, like the streamlining of dungeons and traversal, meaning that you didn't have to break through quite as many barriers to get to the still unrivaled character interactions and the densely weaved mystery that you're actually here for, topped off with an enhanced visual flair that simply wasn't present in the original. Okay, the load times are absurd, I will give you that, but what's become clear to me is that the heart of these games, more so than in almost any other game I've played, is always more important than the imperfect technical framework holding it all together. And as someone instantly transferring from one deadly premonition to the next, the transition couldn't have felt more natural. The evolution of this narrative universe entirely necessary and earned. Despite its issues, I dearly love Deadly Premonition 2, and finally giving myself over to this series in the way that it deserves proved to be one of the more enjoyable things I did in 2020. And with that, the runner-up for my Game of the Year is Yakuza Like a Dragon. I hate to do this to you, I really do, but I'm going to skimp on a lot of the details here. I've been getting a bunch of messages from people asking my thoughts on Yakuza 7, and well, I'm going to be giving that game its own video very soon, and I don't want to repeat myself too much in that script, but what I will say is this: I should despise this game. I try not to paint genres with too broad a brush, but I kind of loathe JRPGs and the turn-based combat often found within. I hate how goofy it looks when a massive climactic moment is reduced to a bunch of people awkwardly standing around waiting to get hit. I hate how my effectiveness in combat is judged by arbitrary numbers and dice rolls rather than my own skill, and good god do I hate grinding. And you're telling me Yakuza, one of my favourite franchises ever, reveals it's ditching its ludicrously impactful brawler system in favour of this exact scenario? Well, to come out of the other side of that experience, not only thinking it was by far the best JRPG I've ever played, but potentially my new favourite Yakuza game, with protagonist Kasuga Yakuza and his band of buddies easily soaring to the heights of the most lovable characters across the franchise, that Nagoshi's team managed to meaningfully deepen the combat system while playing into the genre's inherent absurdities and retaining all the impact of that brawler framework. And not only that, but that I thought that this game couldn't have been anything other than a JRPG, that this might be the most effective means of conveying the heart of Yakuza and giving character to its world through these systems, asking the question of what would happen if you took the genre's tropes like its representation of heroism and good versus evil morality and applied them to real life, telling a story that manages to be truly hilarious in its execution of that ridiculous concept while also remaining a more sincere and thorough examination than any prior installment of what it means to actually be a good person in a world whose bureaucracy muddies those waters and highlights the blatant hypocrisy of those claiming to be morally superior to society's underclasses. Safe to say, I think this game is something really special. The only reason it didn't make my top spot was because at a few key points it was also the most infuriating game I played this year by a country mile, where the game's balance would suddenly go off the rails in favour of the occasional wild difficulty spike that would see the momentum of the story grind to a halt so that I could spend literally hours going back to the game's dingy sewers increasing those wholly arbitrary numbers. And you know what? It didn't matter in the end, because my eventual victory in that fucking Chapter 9 boss fight was based not on skill, but that the RNG rolled in my favour for once and stopped the boss in question doubling, tripling up on his more or less insta-kill attack. All this stuff, the disrespect of my time that I so dislike about other JRPGs that had up to that point been kept at bay here. But again, the fact that I can experience all of that, go from adoring this game to sending messages of pure rage to my podcast co-host, a noted Dragon Quest aficionado Nico, demanding to know how people could possibly enjoy this type of game, to almost immediately come back around to thinking, yeah, you know, this game totally rules. It's testament to how remarkable I think Like a Dragon actually is, and as I say, I'll have a more in-depth video explaining why coming out very soon. Just know that as turbulent as my relationship with this game has been, it's one that I can't help but absolutely adore. But for now, as usual, before we get to my number one pick, it's time for some unranked honourable mentions. The amount of pointless obstacles Trackmania puts in players' way, from the daft messaging of its payment system to its abysmal UI design and confounding blocking off of customization features, just kept the game from making it onto my actual list. Which is a real shame, because the feeling of speed experienced within its time trial racing, at once furious and oddly zen-like, is unmatched as far as I'm concerned. And the dozens of hours I've spent returning to Trackmania show just how much of a comfort blanket it's been this year. It just should be the biggest game in the world, rather than the weird thing you have to constantly explain to people why you like so much. Astro's Playroom is without question the best tech demo I've ever played, to the point that it feels weird referring to it as something so clinical. It's so finely tuned to cater exclusively to my own particular gaming nostalgia, feeling like a true celebration of PlayStation's rich history by proudly showcasing the ambitious missteps of the brand, as much as foregrounding its successes. Of course, don't buy a console for this game, but if you have a PS5 and a yearning for the simpler times where 8 megabytes of storage was categorically next gen, you've got nothing to lose by spending a few hours exploring this completely charming world and poring over every pixel of the insanely detailed peripherals found within. Nioh 2 is simultaneously the kind of game I craved at the start of lockdown, with its wild difficulty feeling like a particularly tough wall that I could bang my frustrated head against, and one whose speed and brutality was so ferocious that, not dissimilar to the first game, I couldn't get super far in due to it causing a legitimate panic response at times. But man, when that game clicked, it was hard not to be reminded of why it's one of the few true successes of the Souls-like genre. There's maybe a reason action games aren't typically made to be as wholly unforgiving as this, but hey, that's why it stands out, right? And you might not expect the aforementioned panic to extend to a discussion about Dreams, a game that spends so long patting you on the head for figuring out the basics of navigation most games want to get you past as soon as possible. But never before has a toolset given me option paralysis quite like this. Dreams crushed me into the ground with the scope of possibility within. At once a stunningly deep and diverse toolset for those with the right mindset, and a reminder of just how crazy it is that any game, no matter how quote-unquote bad, releases at all given how hard they are to make. I don't know, I felt like with the recent reports of a dwindling player base, I should draw attention to just how incredible a job Media Molecule did here, and why you should all still give a damn, even if you don't plan on actually making anything. And I'll be the first to admit that I completely dropped the ball on Half-Life Alyx. I am such a massive cheerleader for VR, and here we have the high watermark of what that technology can offer, countering the common complaint that there just aren't enough actual games, damn it, it's all one and done tech demos, with a full-blown narrative-heavy action title, one whose years of craftsmanship are made evident in just how scarily detailed the whole thing is. It just so happens that my current living situation that shifted just before lockdown doesn't readily allow for the space or time requirements to get fully immersed in Alyx's unbelievable world, so it fell to the wayside a bit. This is one I'll be returning to in the future for sure though. And Bad Guys at School is a game that I can't quite stop thinking about. It looks about as Steam asset flippy as you can get, but trust me when I say it has the aesthetic of Bully, the humour of Goat Simulator, and strangely, hints here and there of the systemic interactions of a game like Hitman, which, combined with surprisingly robust multiplayer features, made it really good fun to mess around with Nico, seeing what havoc we could cause in this nonsensically open environment. Not incredible by any means, but definitely not the worst £3 I spent this year either. And yeah, I enjoyed Cyberpunk alright. It's not really the massive open-ended RPG it seemed like it might be. There were shenanigans that ended up messing console players about, and it's a buggy mess. But you know what? I thought it was still pretty damn good, and I've been called a corporate shill on one side for that opinion, and been made to feel like an outright bad person on the other for liking a game. But psst, that's not how media or art or criticism works. This game isn't what you think it is. It has way more heart than it was ever given credit for, separate from the business decisions made by CD Projekt Red that led to the game being released in such an unfinished state. Look, I don't do a worst thing award, but if I did, it would absolutely go to any instance of video game discourse, or any discourse on any matter on Twitter or any other social platform this year. It was bad before, but the pandemic shifted it to downright embarrassing, and if not taking Twitter opinions seriously anymore is all we achieve in 2021, we will have moved closer than you might think to actual utopia. And with that out of the way, it's time to reveal that my number one game of 2020 is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. After all of this, all of these games that brought with them such outward complexity, who made me question my own biases towards entire genres, it might seem surprising, or perhaps even anticlimactic to some, that my game of the year is a remake of two arcade skating titles from the 90s, and that's kind of it. Even despite my proclamation that this would probably be the case in my video earlier this year, which left a surprising amount of people balking. Really? Are you sure? This is your game of the year? You haven't even played Cyberpunk yet. And look, I made mention of it in my review of the game, but I should probably emphasise my perspective a bit here. I have so many games I will passionately, excitedly argue the case for why it's up there as one of the greatest of all time or whatever, but I can say for certain that over the years I've maintained three absolute favourite games: Killer 7, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. The latter, I've argued, is about as close to game design perfection as one can get. I constantly question whether this is actually the right word to use, but whenever I think of that game, I picture purity. Weirdly, it doesn't matter that you're on a skateboard in Pro Skater. The glorious fluidity of that movement, how vanishingly little gets in the way of that, from cutscenes right down to load times, would work for any means of locomotion. It's probably my most played video game, because it's the one I return to at almost every opportunity. It's that timeless. No matter how big my backlog is, I always find myself trying to get a little bit of Pro Skater 3 in most days. Well, until recently that is. Getting the footage you're seeing for this video is the most I've played in months, and outside of adoring the structure of these particular levels, my brain was screaming at me the whole time that I'd rather be playing Pro Skater 1 and 2. I previously found it wild that I was able to even posit that this remake feels at least as good as one of my top 3 games of all time, and months after its release and countless hours clocked, more than almost any game this year bar an absolutely massive JRPG, I feel strangely confident solidifying that claim. I 100%ed Pro Skater 1 and 2 within a few hours of its release, and I can't stop. Vicarious Visions took the purity that was so perfected in 3 and somehow refined it even further. It's to the point that the team listened to complaints that once you'd gone through a tour, you couldn't simply reset the goals to complete them again with another skater. It seemed like such an odd complaint. You can do the career goals all you like, I thought. There's a speedrun mode. which, by the way, is one of the most ingenious inclusions for a game like this and saw me spend so long frantically trying to shave milliseconds off my best times, despite not being much of a speedrun person myself. And then I actually played the new solo tours when they were patched in, and I realised how naive I was. There is something about that game that just feels so undeniably different, depending on whether the counter is going down from 2 minutes, rather than up from 0. It seems like such a small detail, but there's a wholly different kind of urgency, of competition, when you're not just jostling for higher leaderboard positions. All of that is to say that this game is such a tightly woven series of interconnecting cogs, each doing exactly what they're meant to do in perfect harmony, that even changing the slightest of details about aspects of this game you might not even think about normally can completely change how those gameplay systems function. And it speaks to the wider achievement on the part of Vicarious Visions that after so remarkably long of this series being treated like absolute dirt, I mean, it really bears remembering that it had been well over a decade since Robomodo took the development reins and drove the series into the ground. The team here were able to capture the elusive feel of the series down to a T, showing so much reverence for the older titles, while also removing any ounce of fat from the more recent control schemes, knowing exactly which features and details to include from future games, and which to leave as the gimmicks they were. And it all amounts to perhaps the purest version of Pro Skater that we've ever seen, one that places complete priority on smooth movement and forward momentum, and gives you exactly what you need to navigate these still incredible levels, as fast, efficiently, and satisfyingly as possible. As an example of sheer craft in a video game, there's very little in my mind that can compare to the beautiful simplicity and restraint of this remake, that also so consistently makes me feel as good as it does when that controller is in my hand. But when I think about why there isn't any title in my mind that could possibly take my Game of the Year 2020 spot outside of this, the reasoning goes beyond that to some incredibly personal, perhaps even uncomfortable places to do with work and life and the struggles therein. See, over half a decade of doing this, of making videos about games, it's impossible to deny that this job changes how you play. Don't get me wrong, I still love games, writing and talking about them, but when you so closely tie your ability to eat and keep a roof over your head to something that you love, you fundamentally approach that thing differently. I constantly worry that if I'm not playing something for a video, if I'm not recording my playthrough or thinking critically at every moment and taking notes about what I'm doing for the sake of a script, then I'm not only wasting time, but there's something in my brain that tells me I'm somehow not going to be able to make rent, or that I'll lose my drive to write about anything, like I'll forget how or something. Maybe it's just having been completely flat broke at various points in life that makes you hustle a bit more to make sure you never get back to that stage, or maybe it's that more insidious voice in my head that keeps reminding me of all the times I was made to feel so small, so insignificant, my own feelings and problems unimportant, my own judgment or interpretation of anything that happened to me as not to be trusted. I was too crazy to know what was best for me, that not only were my creative endeavours not real work, that any joy I felt was a selfish indulgence to be rejected because it wasn't directly in service of something, someone else. Without that outside purpose, any kind of emotional fulfillment was to be flatly rejected and felt bad about. There was always something that I was doing wrong, something that was fundamentally wrong with me for wanting to be happy or comfortable, to not feel terrified that bad things were going to happen to me, that I was going to be screamed at or emotionally steamrolled into situations I really didn't want to be in. I'm tired, I don't sleep a lot, I'm scared of going to bed, I get really vivid, visceral nightmares and flashbacks and stuff. I generally don't relax very much. I'm tense pretty much all the time, bracing for shit that's no longer there. I'm safe, but it's so hard to actually trust in that when your sense of self-worth, and not just self-belief, but belief in your perception of reality, has been so thoroughly ground down and warped over the years. I still love the process of making things. I like to think I'm producing videos of some small value to someone out there. It's just that with all this stuff going on in my head so constantly, I can't stop to just examine how I built this thing completely by myself. The fact that I'm now supporting myself financially from a thing I started at perhaps my lowest point, when I was in a really bad situation and I didn't think there was anywhere to go. The people I've met, the opportunities I've had, none of it seems to really register in those prolonged periods of panic and depression because I keep thinking of how many opportunities I've turned down that I don't feel I deserve because I've been so scared of failing, of having it all taken away from me if I stop for even a second, if I don't consider and become consumed by the ways in which I could be fucking this up. I've been making videos for over half a fucking decade and I've been dominated by that fear and doubt that I'm in any way good enough for the vast majority of that time. And the process of therapy has brought so much of that stuff into perspective in a pretty harrowing way, that as much as it's a healthy thing, a necessary part of the healing process, has made me constantly question so much of my life up to this point and whether I was actually in control or just having my strings pulled. 2020 has been the fucking worst. And I'm sorry for going on like this. I can see the comments now telling me I'm whining about nothing or whatever, but look, I'm not saying I'm somehow some unique, precious little thing for feeling this way or having been in these situations. People had it way harder than me this year, and I'm not trying to diminish those experiences in any way. I am obviously incredibly lucky to be able to do what I do. I get to work from home in a pandemic, I'm not in retail anymore, and that is far from nothing. But that pandemic has also heightened all of these insecurities, prevented me from doing the things I would normally do to try and clear my head, like go on long walks or physically train or anything like that. And so it's just been work. And while I genuinely don't care about growing the channel or becoming more popular or some kind of personality, I can think of very little more nauseating. Having your actual numerical value constantly fluctuate right before your eyes with YouTube, the platform that claims to care so much about creator mental health, telling you your content is bad and you should feel bad, threatening you with the idea that you just might not be able to sustain this on your own for much longer, it has an effect after a while. I wish I didn't feel all of these pressures, both personal and professional, constantly weighing down on my skull, but it's all there. If I'm not working at this thing I feel guilty even referring to as work, then I am not grateful and I will fail. In short, and to bring it back around, there are all kinds of mental barriers to me feeling like I'm actually allowed to enjoy something, anything, without causing real internal panic, that in 2020 became so much taller, so much more inescapable. And the fact I could have an experience with a video game this year that represented pure joy with zero worry or frustrations, something that I didn't feel bad about indulging in, that I didn't feel the need to record or write about every second of my experience with, that I could have for me, that I could just do and be okay at, without worrying that I was failing in some other part of my life as a result. Hell, that I could have just a new favourite thing in such a fucking horrible year is pretty damn significant to me. And so yeah, it might feel a little weird to see a seemingly simple remake top my list this year rather than some massive new AAA IP or something that shifts the very foundation of how we view narrative or anything like that. But believe me when I say that I so desperately needed Pro Skater 1 and 2 this year. This game made me see the potential for pure unconditional good when everything around us felt so dreadfully bad, and that's why there's no other game that could take the position of my game of the year for 2020. But after all that, as always, it wasn't just the games that got me through this hell year, it was the people, the friends that reached out, and the video creators that helped distract me, even momentarily, from some of those more grim thoughts. Even if I didn't watch a whole lot of new creators this year, I wanted to shout out some people that totally deserve your viewership. A couple of years ago, I got an email from a fan looking for advice on how to start their own YouTube channel, to which I responded with my own essay of things to look out for on the platform. Fast forward to last year, and I get another email out of the blue from Michael of Games and Culture, letting me know that he'd just posted his first video. And man, trust me when I say a lot of creators looking back on their old stuff wish they could have started a fraction as strongly as Michael did. The few videos he's put out have been ludicrously good so far, with a does what it says on the tin approach that I can really appreciate, examining where games and our wider culture intersect with delightfully dry but still casual delivery and great production values. Mark my words, Games and Culture is one to look out for sure. In Frame Out continues to be one of the true undiscovered joys of the platform, whose poetic musings on cinema, combined with their really cool Discord server, reignited my passion for movies. Everything on the channel is gold, but maybe start with this really fun exploration of modern Russian blockbusters. This year solidified In Frame Out in my eyes as easily one of the great YouTube film essayists, up there with cinema cartography and Every Frame a Painting. And speaking of frames, Framework is the, well, work of one Tony Wilson, who's gone solo after last year's unfortunate GameSpot layoffs and is creating some really neat video essays trying to inject some much needed positivity into discussion of games. He has a really great explainer on Demon's Souls world tendency if you feel like getting in on the ground floor of a great channel. And the Sid course made its grand return this year, led by the man with the most sultry voice on the internet by some margin. But the beauty of Leonardo's videos goes way beyond the surface level, utilising his unique life experiences and passions to provide a genuinely novel and interesting perspective on things like accessibility and visual art in games. Fucking Thor High Heels is a channel that every time I've done one of these shoutout segments, I've relentlessly kicked myself afterwards for forgetting to include them. Not that the channel needs any help or anything, it's been seeing some unbelievable and super well-deserved growth of late, but the way Thor manages to find and luxuriate in the odd beauty of so many imperfect but no less important games speaks to my media sensibilities in such a specific way that I often think, damn, I wish I'd thought of that. Basically, every one of Thor's videos are a means by which I beat myself up, which means they're really good. And god, it feels so weird to shout out a name as recognisable in this field as Tim Goshdarn Rogers. But in case you don't know, he left his job at Kotaku earlier last year to start up his Action Button YouTube channel for his own massive, winding, introspective, hilarious, absurdly detailed reviews. The channel's currently sitting at around 30 to 40,000 subs, and that number needs to go up because it's hard for long-form stuff to really grab my attention these days. But he just put out a 6-hour video on a game I've never played before that has completely flown by thanks to his utterly inimitable style. If you don't know him and want to know why a lot of us write so personally and tangentially about video games, look no further than Tim Rogers. And I do this every time, but I really mean it. Lambhoot is still just the best and continues to get better somehow. If you're not watching Dennis's stuff, you are missing out on some of the most simultaneously hilarious and unbelievably insightful videos on this damn website. Almost every single one he puts out manages to take the crown for my new favourite Lambhoot video, to the point that I'd just say start with his most recent Game of the Year piece. Just don't expect to see many actual games on it. And with all of that out the way, finally, once again, I'd just like to sincerely thank my patrons. Believe me when I say I questioned the sustainability of this channel a lot this year, and it really hit home just how crucial your support was to these videos existing, and I can never thank you enough for that. If you've enjoyed any of the videos I've put out and want to help the channel continue so I can keep making more, you can directly help out, as well as get things like early access to ad-free video uploads by heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging only what you feel comfortable with. Also, if somehow you want even more Game of the Year talk, be sure to check out the Writing on Games cast on Anchor or wherever you get your podcasts, where before Christmas we spent 12 hours deliberating the dumbest picks imaginable. It was so much fun, and I hope it gives you a laugh too. God knows we all need it. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Ruth Knapman, Leah Chinello, Henry Milek, Bryce Snyder, Lucas, David Björk, Winter, Timothy Jones, Hebe Amore, The Nameless Guy, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Dr. Motorcycle, Shardfire, Rob, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Spike Jones, Dallas Keane, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been the first Writing on Games episode for 2021. Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.